Millions of Americans retire every single year, but of those retirees, each of those is typically going to have a surprise or a shock that comes up to them in retirement or as they progress through retirement that they were not able to plan for or they weren't expecting. God does not plan that everyone lives the exact same lives, and in this video, I'm not going to be able to tell you what your surprise or shock is going to be, but what I will be able to share is three of the most common that I typically see across the board with the retirees that I work with. It doesn't necessarily mean it's something about your portfolio or whether or not to do a Roth conversion, when to take Social Security. While each of these are very common and very popular topics to discuss, today I'm going even further into issues like identity, into issues like energy and health, things that people are not anticipating in retirement because prior to that, they've only been taught to only plan for financial topics. So I'm going to share three of those here rather briefly with you, but feel free to comment below your own experiences. Would always love to hear that. Without a doubt, the biggest surprise of retirement is a mindset shift in loss of identity. Now, rather than explain this to you, I'll just give you an example of a client that we had in this week. He was a longtime consultant. Prior to that, he did project management, and he took those two skills and he then progressed and started his own company, was able to come and go as he pleased with that company until he was in his early 60s. He decided to retire, and that's when everything changed. He came in, and not only did he feel less than simply because he no longer had people calling him, he no longer had his expertise that was able to be given to the world, wasn't able to be given to his clients. He also woke up every single day with a clean slate. And I know that that sounds ideal maybe for some of you, but to others, waking up every single day without an agenda, waking up every single day without something that you need to be productive with is a very difficult mental shift to make. Furthermore, this also changes your identity. Now, I don't know about you, but a lot of retirees and a lot of people working in America are very attached to their jobs. They're very attached to their roles that they have at work or whatever organization that they're at. Now, I'm not saying that this is necessarily a bad thing. It's good to have passion and it's good to care about the work that you put in and the progress in the career that you build. But ultimately, it is difficult to unwind that identity in retirement. This conversation I had with this business owner or consultant, he talked about how difficult it was to flip the switch. He had spent 30 or 40 years being able to build up these habits, being able to form this schedule, and being able to make himself financially free. But now that he was able to have the opportunity to essentially bear the fruit of all that labor, he wasn't able to enjoy it the way he was. And if you think about what makes someone financially free here in America, what really comes to mind? When I make my own list, I think about decades of diligent saving and investing, advancing at work to earn a higher income or advancing your business, improving yourself while staying physically fit, delaying vacations, travel, fine dining, things that are fun in order to stay disciplined, being able to balance family and friendships without burning out at work, and creating all of this on a repeatable routine that brings out your best each and every week. And what you think of when you think of retirement is a lot of these are no longer needed. That was a struggle that I saw this particular retiree go through, and it's not uncommon. The difficulty here is it's tough to say that even if you plan for this, that you're not gonna hit some speed bump along the way when it comes to your retirement. Now, as I mentioned, he sort of progressed out, right? He was at a few larger companies, and then he had his own side business that allowed him to come and go and use his skills. And then finally he retired. So there was a steady progression. But at the end of the day, there's going to be there's going to be a time and place that you no longer can keep the same pace anymore, that you may not even have the desire or the ability to do so. So it's best to plan for that rather than just try to avoid it. And while it is beyond the scope of this video to speak directly to how you're fulfilled and what would give you purpose in retirement, I can share what helped this particular person. So he took two non-paid roles. The first was a role at his church. He was able to help with project management of events and at the same time help with the structure of how church groups were organized. And the second piece was he also took on a non-paid role going around town helping women who had recently been widowed do simple things like take care of light bulbs, fix things around the house, do a lot of things that otherwise they wouldn't have been able to do. So I don't know what your purpose is, but I do know that this is probably the number one surprise in folks' retirement. Now, the second surprise here is more of a litany of surprises, but ultimately what I'm talking about here is that your expectations, as in your planning, don't meet reality. Now, if you've ever had a Monte Carlo projection done, you know that what it does is it assumes a lot of different numbers and a lot of different expectations for your retirement, and then it gives you a score based on how likely you are to succeed with those assumptions and with those estimations. So for an example, we typically assume that inflation is going to range from 2 to 3.5% throughout someone's retirement. That's just because of what it has historically been here in America. We generally assume anywhere from high fives to low sevens in terms of what a retiree will expect in retirement from their investments. Finally, if it is a couple, we expect that the husband and the wife are going to live into their 90s. Now, while data shows that this is much more conservative than it needs to be, the last thing that we want to do with a projection is be aggressive. While I love projections and I appreciate Monte Carlo analyses, they're always wrong. And I tell my clients that up front, because if you think of all the different variables that you have to include in a Monte Carlo or any retirement projection, the odds that even one of those goes wrong is almost certain. I'm not saying that a Monte Carlo is a waste of your time. It's a great place to start. What I'm saying is if you get too attached to what the numbers say, you're going to be disappointed by the actual realism that comes when you get to retirement. Things like early losses in retirement can dramatically affect your withdrawals. This is known as sequence of return risk. Things like travel, hobbies, family support, and daily living can exceed your projections. Supporting adult children or aging parents unexpectedly can happen very quickly, and this is something that I've seen come up actually quite regularly recently. Things like parents needing them more frequently or more often than they had anticipated. Maybe a kid doesn't turn out to be the grade A student that they were in high school, and they need them to move closer, or they need money, or they need your assistance in some form or fashion, right? Those are some common examples. Others include major home repairs, relocation costs, inflation running higher than assumed, that erodes purchasing power, and things like Medicare not covering everything, so things such as long-term care, hospital stays, and expensive prescriptions draining your savings. So those are just 6 or 7 that I just listed off there, but like I said, there's hundreds of variables that can actually throw off a projection like this. So one of the surprises I see is just getting into retirement and keeping a printout or keeping this saved on your computer and then pointing back to the sheet and being saying, this is not what I anticipated at all. This is what the projection said. When in reality, that projection is for sure going to be the only thing that we know is not going to happen. So like I said, I'm not hitting on a Monte Carlo analysis. I'm not saying they're not a helpful place to start. I'm just saying it is very important to be realistic and be agile with your retirement planning. So the third one here is health and energy in retirement. And I don't have to explain to you necessarily that everyone in retirement has some form or fashion of battle with their health and their energy decreases. But I want to point out that scene in Rocky IV. It's when Rocky and Apollo Creed are watching their fight from Rocky I in the theater. And Rocky looks at Apollo as he's clamoring on and on about how great they were and says, hey, that's not us anymore. And that was the worst reenactment or the worst Philadelphia accent I probably could have used there. But if you've seen the scene, you know what I'm talking about. But what I'm really getting at here is a similar pattern comes up in retirement. And furthermore, it surprises people more than they might expect. So I do have a practical consideration here, and that's to spend more early on. And let me explain what I'm talking about here. We often talk about the go-go years, the slow-go years, and the no-go years. Those go-go years represent the time right after you retire. You have a bucket list full of items such as travel, such as visiting your children, grandchildren in other states, taking new golf lessons, taking a new yoga class, something that you've always wanted to do. And what you're able to do is have the energy to do that, you have the excitement to do it, but as time progresses on, you move into the slow-go years. Maybe this is your 70s, maybe for some of you this is your 80s, but this is when some of that loses its flavor, some of that loses its excitement. And now you're not leaving the house as much, you're not going on as many trips, you're not seeing kids as often. And then finally, you get into your no-go years. I don't know if this means a nursing home, I don't know if this means just not leaving the house, but eventually we all break down to the point where it's difficult to leave the house, it's difficult to travel and get on an airplane, and things of that nature. So another flaw that I see with Monte Carlos, not to keep picking on it, is that a Monte Carlo projection is generally going to assume you're continually going to spend the same level in retirement. So what I mean by that is if $100,000 is what you need to live on today, we're going to continually increase that by whatever inflation is. When a more realistic scenario might look like for you is you spend a lot more the first 10 years of retirement, you spend a little bit less the next 10, and then the final 10 you spend way less than you actually had planned on. But because that you had planned further out to spend much more than you otherwise would have, you took far fewer dollars at the start of your retirement than you otherwise would have. Oftentimes the spending is going to decrease for a number of reasons again, but some of the most common that I see are a spouse passes and it's going to reduce travel and social activities. Your health is going to decline, which is going to limit physical ability to travel or just participate in activities. As I mentioned, you check off bucket list goals pretty early on, whether it's your 50s or 60s. So that desire to do so is just going to diminish, and then your grandkids grow up and it reduces the opportunities for travel or activities focused on that. So plan your retirement with flexibility, right? Maybe it makes sense to front load your expenses to a certain degree to help with travel and to maybe even help kids buy a home or grandkids and so forth, right? There's going to be a whole bucket list of things that I know you want to achieve in retirement. So if it makes sense and if you're able to front load that and plan on spending less in retirement, or if you're not actually planning on living into your 90s, you might want to be realistic here as well. So health and energy is another surprise, and the surprise that comes from lack of planning or too much restriction from a Monte Carlo also feeds into that. So folks, those are my three most important surprises that I generally like to point out to clients I work with. So if this has been helpful to you, feel free to share your own experiences in the comments. As always, a like and a subscribe, it greatly helps me out as I build this channel. But I thank you guys so much for visiting today, and I will see you next time.